Back in the 90s and early 2000s, the Milwaukee, Wisconsin Hmong community predominantly lived on the south side, with some living on the north side. One of the most used funeral homes at the time was located on the south side. The name of it was the Forest Home Funeral Home. Hey, that rhymed. The entrance of the home had 2 small flights of stairs. If you went straight at the top, you'd end up in the main hall. Taking a right at the top of the stairs would lead you to the smaller rooms that lined the right-hand side of the main hall. The first room on the right had the stairs that led to the men's restroom. You'd cross the room, go down the stairs, turn left and go down a long, narrow hallway with doors on each side to reach the restroom at the end. One night, 2 guys went down to use the restroom. They were finishing up and washing their hands when the lights in the bathroom and hallway started to flicker. Confused, they started to walk towards the hallway to investigate when another guy ran into the bathroom. A little surprised, they asked him, "Is everything okay? Why did you run in here so fast?" He hastily replied, a little out of breath, I was more than halfway down the hallway when the side doors started to open and the lights started to flicker, so I ran here as fast as I could." A little scared, the trio peered out into the hallway to see that the side doors had fully opened. At the same time, though, the flickering lights finally cuts out, leaving only darkness to accompany them. They fumbled around and got the restroom door shut and locked. As time slowly crept by, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, soft footsteps could be heard heading towards the bathroom. Eventually, there was a knock on the door, accompanied by a muffled, gargling voice. "Open the door." Scared out of their mind, the 3 guys kept quiet with the hope that this event would pass by without any danger. Unfortunately, more knocks ran out on the door with more voices asking for the door to be opened. The sounds escalated from knocking to pounding. The door trembled violently. The voices were getting ever louder. Afraid of what was on the other side, the trio rushed to brace the door. Unsure of how long this would go on for, they blocked the door with all their might, holding on for dear life until finally the lights turned back on. From a cacophony of voices and pounding, it went to silence. The pounding stopped and the voices went mute. A silence so quiet that the dripping sound of water from the sink faucets could be heard. Then came the sound of soft shuffling feet on the other side of the door. When the sound of footsteps stopped, the gentle clicks of the doors closing could be heard. Relieved but still wary due to what just happened, they continued to brace the door. For minutes they listened, hoping for a sign that everything was back to normal. Waiting for what seemed like an eternity, they finally heard it. Footsteps, quiet, and then louder. It stopped on the other side of the door. A jiggle of the doorknob, then a slight push could be felt against the door. Finally, a knock. "Hello? Anybody in there?" Sighs of relief came out from the 3 of them. Finally, another human's voice. They quickly unlocked the door and opened it. "Why was the door locked? Is everything okay? You guys don't look too good. You're all pale and sweaty." One of the trio replied with a question. "Is everything okay upstairs? The lights, they just suddenly turned off earlier down here." "The lights have always been on the whole time I've been here," the 4th man responded. "Did something happen down here?" Okay. Nothing happened. Just the lights randomly turning off scared us. We had to scramble around in the dark trying to find the switch. We'll finish washing up our hands then," replied the trio. They washed their hands and waited for the 4th man before heading back up together. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, I hated horror movies. It wasn't my thing at all. My cousins loved them somehow and always put them on. They knew I was scared of it and they'd always put it on just to scare me for fun. One day, one of my cousins put on a Hmong horror movie. I forgot what movie it was, but it was one of those very old horror movies like J'étais Chua. It was only the beginning of it when I was already shaking. My grandma then yelled at them to stop the movie since I think she noticed that I was crying and shaking. My cousin stopped the movie and took out the disc. I was doing fine that day until nighttime. My parents and my little sister slept in the bedroom while my two brothers and I slept in the living room. We were all sleeping together on the floor. I was sleeping in the middle between them when one of my brothers who was sleeping by my end told me to switch spots with him, and so I did. We were sleeping peacefully until I randomly woke up. I opened my eyes and saw this woman-like shadow figure staring down at me. I was shocked to see her, but somehow, I didn't have the feeling of being frightened yet. I didn't know what it was. Instead, I remained calm and tried to figure out who it was by looking at it. The woman had long wavy hair and was tall. I didn't see her face since it was too dark to be seen. I then asked if she was my sister. "Mycie, is that you?" It didn't respond, so I said it again. "Mycie, is that you? Stop playing with me." But this time, I tried to grab her hand to see if it was just Mycie trying to play around with me. I reached for the figure's hand or arm where it was located, and I felt nothing. My heart was racing. I was trying to grab her hand, but it felt like air. It truly felt like there was nothing there at all. That's when I started to panic, thinking to myself, what if this figure is a ghost? My heart started racing and I cried. But no matter how much I cried, no matter how loud I cried, none of my brothers next to me heard it. It was as if something made them not be able to hear me. I tried to scream as loud as I could, but nothing worked. After a few screams, my mom suddenly woke up and turned on the lights. I remembered exactly when the spirit heard my mom's footsteps to turn on the light. It disappeared right away. My mom then came to me and asked what happened. I didn't answer. I was full of tears, too traumatized. I then went to sleep with my parents and my sister. The next morning, I told my parents and my grandparents about the woman-like figure that I saw last night. They did an oneng the next day. I felt all better after that, and I was hoping that there wouldn't be a next time. Jumping to this day, I love horror movies. I watch them with families or even alone sometimes. I also love listening to scary stories by many different people on YouTube. Hey, I hope that HmongChronicles is your favorite channel. That was it for my story. Hope you guys enjoyed it because it was a very tough journey for me to go through as a kid. Do you believe in weird dreams? In the Hmong culture, we believe that when you have weird dreams, they might be a sign of something good or bad. One of the beliefs that we believe in is if you are a parent and dream that your teeth is falling out, that means it's a bad sign that you should be careful and watch your children. Something bad might happen to them. Before my father-in-law passed away many years ago, 2 nights before he went to the hospital, I had a dream that I was somewhere I don't know where I was, but I was standing in the middle of a road. I can see very far in front of me that there were 2 ladies dressed in white dresses, and they were standing on each side of something that looked to be a hospital bed. They were coming closer and closer to me. As they got closer, I could see that there was a person on the bed, but I didn't know who it was. They got closer and closer. Then, they were right in front of me. I couldn't see the ladies' faces for some reason, but I could see the person on the bed's face. It was a man, a very young man, maybe around my husband's age. It seems like I've seen this man before or I know him from somewhere, but I just can't exactly tell who he is. One of the ladies said, "We're only bringing him for you to see one last time." Then they pushed him away and they went further and further away, and they were eventually gone. This was when I woke up from my dream. On that night, maybe around 10 p.m. or so, My mother-in-law came knocking on our door. My husband worked second shift, so he was not home yet. She knocked really loud and was shouting, "Call 911, your father is having a really bad stomachache and he can't breathe." I walked as fast as I could since I was 7 months pregnant at the time to open the door, and then I went to their bedroom. My father-in-law was sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked fine to me and he was breathing okay. I walked over to him and asked him if he was alright. He said that he was okay and that he was just having a little pain in his stomach, and he doesn't know what it is but is having a hard time breathing. I asked him if he wants me to call for an ambulance and he said yes. In my mind, I'm thinking that he doesn't need to go to the hospital. He looks fine. Maybe if he rests for a while he would be okay and would catch his breath, but I didn't say anything. I called the emergency number and in about 10 minutes they arrived. The medical technicians team rushed into the house and into their bedroom. They listened to his heart and lungs and they asked me a few questions about him, about what he ate and his medical history. A little while after that, they put him on the gurney and took him into the ambulance. Since my mother-in-law doesn't speak English, I went with them in the ambulance. My mother-in-law said that she will call her daughter to drive her and meet us at the hospital. I sat in the back with my father-in-law. He was laying on the gurney. They were starting an IV on one of his arms. Then he put his head up and looked at me and said, "Daughter-in-law, I'm very thirsty. Do they have any water here? Can I have some water?" They gently pushed his head back down on the bed and told him not to talk. I said to the technicians, "Can my father have some water? He is very thirsty." They said no, not at the moment. So in Hmong, I explained to my father-in-law that they won't allow him any water yet. Soon, when we finally got to the hospital, they took him out of the ambulance and into a small room. They then transferred him onto a different bed, and then a doctor walked in and checks his heart and lungs again and asks me more questions about him. Then the doctor left and we were alone. My father-in-law got up and sat on one side of the bed and said, "Can you give me some water now? I'm very thirsty and my throat is dried up." I said, "Yes, father. I will ask them as soon as they come back." Just then, my mother-in-law and her daughter walked in. They asked me what they were going to do to my father-in-law. I told them that they haven't done anything yet. All they did was just listen to his heartbeat and ask me some questions. Then my husband finally came. My father-in-law sat on one side of the bed and was talking to us, like nothing was wrong with him. Then he started to complain about how thirsty he was and how he wanted to go back home. Maybe like almost an hour later, the nurse came back to check on him. He quickly laid back down on his bed. The nurse asked me how he's feeling now. He said that he feels okay, but he wants to know when he can go home and if he can get some water. She said that he can't have any water at the moment, but they can give him some ice cubes to suck on. But she never answered my question about when he can go home. I explained to my father-in-law about what she said, but he doesn't want any ice cubes. He said he wanted water. The nurse refused to give him water, and this made my father-in-law mad. Not long after, she came back and said that they needed to take him to a room to do some testing. And again, he asks for water, and she replied that he can't get any. They pushed him out and into an elevator. Our family sat in the room and waited. We waited for what felt like almost 3 hours, and they never brought him back. Then a nurse came and said that they have him in the ICU. I was confused, but I explained to my mother-in-law that he was in the ICU. She asked me, why did they put him in there for? He was just fine. I asked the nurse why he was in the ICU room. I told her that he was fine and just talking to us a few hours ago, and she said that his kidneys were not working properly. She said that we can go and see him now, but we can't stay in there too long. We have to stay in the waiting room. So we all went up to the ICU. There laid my poor old father-in-law on life support. He was not moving. We walked in and stood around him. My mother-in-law called for him. She calls and calls for him. She told him that if he could hear her, for him to squeeze her hand, but he didn't. My mother-in-law kept on telling him to squeeze her hand if he can hear her, but he never once did. My mother-in-law began to cry and we all started to cry. I began to wonder why all of a sudden he was like this. He was fine earlier. The nurse came in and said that only 2 people were allowed to stay with him. So we decided that my mother-in-law and I would stay with my father-in-law. All we did was just sit there and look at him. Once in a while, I would go stay in the waiting room and let my husband come and stay with my mother-in-law. We stayed there all day. Soon my husband left to go to work. We stayed there for 2 nights and 3 days. On the 3rd day, the nurse came and said that my father-in-law is not going to wake up anymore, so we have to get our families together and take him off of life support. It was a confusing and sad moment. I called everyone to come to the hospital for a family meeting. Soon after that, everyone arrived. We all talked and decided to take him off life support. There were about 10 of us. We all went into his room. We helped each other put Hmong clothes on him. The nurse came in with boxes of tissues. Our family stood around the bed, and we watched as the nurse came and slowly took off the tubes and other stuff on him. My husband and his brother both held my father-in-law's arm since they were his only sons. We watched the numbers on the monitor go down and everybody started to cry. I watched the monitor with tears in my eyes as my heart beat faster as the numbers started to go down. Then, all of a sudden, there was no number anymore, but a straight line. Everyone cried like crazy, calling for my father-in-law. In my head, I apologized to my father-in-law for never getting him a drink of water that he had just been asking for ever since we got into the ambulance. Just then, my mother-in-law could not make a single sound out of her mouth anymore, no matter how hard she tried. She just suddenly lost her voice right there and then. Before the funeral, we took my mother-in-law to visit a shaman, and the shaman said that my father-in-law was very thirsty before he passed away, and that was why he made my mother-in-law lose her voice. The shaman said that in order for my mother-in-law to get her voice back, at the funeral, she needs to give my father-in-law 3 drops of water into his mouth. On the day before the funeral, my mother-in-law and I were going through pictures to post it up at his funeral. I came upon a picture of a man that I thought I saw before. It was an old black and white picture. I had looked at the picture for a long time, trying to figure out where I had seen this man before. Did I see someone that looks like him, or do I know? I stared at the picture for a long time. Then it all came to me. I was right. I did see him before. He was the man from my dream. I quickly asked my mother-in-law who the man in the picture was, and she whispered softly to me since she couldn't make a sound. She said that it was my father-in-law when he was younger. Condolences to this person and their family. But man, what was up with the nurses and their just miscommunications? This is why more people just hate hospitals, because they don't do stuff. They don't tell you what's going on. How did he have kidney failure and all of a sudden he's in the ICU and then now all of a sudden he's in a coma and then he's on life support? The nurses just don't say anything, gosh.